The Philadelphia Flyers have reached NHL 500 under John Tortorella, but what does the second half hold for the Flyers? Rachel Donner of Locked On Flyers joins us to discuss what they may do at the trade deadline and a whole lot more next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Gil Martin, so glad you could be with us today. Thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome in my usual Friday co-host, the host of Locked On Flyers, Rachel Donner. And Rachel, we're past the All-Star break now. I think some people are surprised the Flyers are at NHL 500 at this point in the season. First, let me ask you this. John Tortorella, how would you grade him at this point up until the season?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think that he was hired to coach a slightly different team than what he got, right? With Sean Couturier being out for the season, obviously, Ryan Ellis, he could never play again. And I think that, and Cam Atkinson is out, right? The one guy who he had a strong relationship with from his time in Columbus has been out the entire season. And so, when he was hired, the expectation is probably like, yeah, he'll get him a few more wins, but maybe that's not the right move. But considering everything, in terms of they were doing a real retool and not a rebuild, like it sort of made sense if you're management and that's your strategy. Like hiring John Tortorella was a good decision. Now, given all of those injuries that I just mentioned, it's been a very different team. And the Flyers, just on paper, are nowhere near as good as they would have expected to be with those guys in. I think that he's done a pretty good job. I think there was, some weeks there that were pretty dire, and it just took time, and that's to be expected. It took time for a lot of the guys to buy in. I think Travis Konechny in particular, who's the team's leading scorer now, sitting at 49 points, he has bought into this system in a way that I don't think many people would have expected. And not only is Konechny shining, I think, as a bright spot on this team, but he's getting penalty kill time. And that's the big thing that Torts has done, is really implement this power kill system with Brad Shaw that they brought from Columbus. And that's been another bright spot in terms of the Tortorella administration, so to speak. I mean, they have the most shorthanded goals in the NHL.
Yeah, and it seems like this team works very hard.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think that Tortorella would say they could probably work harder on the forecheck, because that seems to be a common refrain from him post game. But I do think that, if you compare what they look like this year versus last season, you could just tell when they'd given up on a game, right? This year, I don't think, maybe once, they've given up on a game all season long. And sometimes they'll pull the goalie and it seems like a dumb move at the time, but they're really just trying to you know double down on that. We're the team that tries hard, right? And we're going to put everything out there every game.
So, the Flyers, we mentioned they're at NHL 500. They're about 6-7 points out of a playoff spot, but there's a lot of teams log jammed there. What do you expect this team to do at the trade deadline?
Well, I think in some ways it's good news that it's a whole month until the trade deadline, because I think we'll see more of a settling in post All-Star break with those teams. Obviously, your Islanders made a huge move. And I see, teams like the Pens and the Caps kicking it into gear, right? That's what they do best is peak at the right time. And so my gut says is that those are the three teams that are fighting for playoff positioning, and that it'll give the Flyers time to really, settle into who they want to sell at trade deadline. And that'll kind of counterbalance the good things that Torts has been doing to make this team play harder, right? If you lose assets like JVR, I've heard talk of Kevin Hayes, Rasmus Ristolainen, who is having a resurgent year, by the way. Defensively, his play has been really much improved over this past season, and he's starting to kick in offensively as well. So he could be a good pickup at the trade deadline as well for any team. And so I think that's really what it's ultimately going to come to, is that we're going to sit for another 2 to 3 weeks, and then maybe a week before trade deadline, that's when the Flyers are going to start selling.
And what do you think they're going to be looking for in return?
Well, I think JVR is the biggest asset, and they're going to retain salary, that's for sure. And I would see, getting a second round pick and a prospect in return. It is really what I'm looking for. The Flyers have traded away their second round picks to the point where they didn't have one for 3 drafts in a row. And second rounders can hit. It's a big difference between a second and a third round pick in the NHL draft. And so I think that's something that the Flyers should be looking to get, especially for this upcoming draft, which is so deep. To have a mid-second rounder is an invaluable asset right now. And so I think that's, the primary deal. If anybody else comes up, I think with Risto, I would like to see a second rounder as well for him. I think that's entirely possible given how he's played defensively this season so far. And, especially if you're looking for somebody to round out your decor heading into the playoffs, I think he's a great option, to be honest.
Yeah, he could definitely help a lot of teams, especially short term. As far as the next 5 games, you have a 5-game homestand starting tonight against the New York Islanders. Do you think the Flyers' approach would change if they go, let's say, 4-0-1 in those 5 games?
Well, I don't think John Tortorella's approach is going to change no matter what's happening. And I don't think the players' approach is going to change no matter what's happening. And so I think that if they keep winning, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because I still think there's 1 or 2 deals they can make at trade deadline, and it's not going to make a huge difference to the Flyers' remainder of the season, but it could to some other teams, and the Flyers could pick up some more assets. But, maybe they're looking to deal fewer players if that's the case. But I still don't think ultimately they should be considering themselves in the playoff hunt at this point, given how everybody else around them is playing.
Makes sense. Rachel, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Sure thing. You can listen and subscribe to Locked On Flyers every day, wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, we're over on YouTube. We are at Locked On Flyers on Twitter and Instagram as well. So check us out over there. And I am at our Miriam. And I'm here every Friday with you, Gil, of course, on Locked On NHL.
I'm always looking forward to that. Rachel Donner, thank you so much for joining us. Today's episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. I started taking AG1 because I am not a big pill taker, and I wanted to get one supplement that would be able to fill all of my nutritional needs. So what is this stuff? Well, with 1 delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, energy, recovery, focus, and aging, all these things. And it's lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day, and that's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NHL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance.